Gary, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the chapter. We've had the honor of presenting this to probably 15 RIMS chapters so far, and we're as excited with the 15th one as we are with the first one, and definitely would like to plunge into it. I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. Tim, why don't you explain who you are first, and then since I'll be doing most of the talking in the initial stages, why don't you explain who you are?
Okay, I'm Tim Eide. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for DoubleCheck, and largely involved in the architecture and design of the software. I have a background from the New Jersey area in the U.S., Bell Labs, Hewlett Packard, a couple of companies like that. And maybe for the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, seems like a really long time, I've been working with DoubleCheck doing various projects, including this risk management platform, which we're happy to show. And Mike had a hand in helping us develop.
Thanks, Tim. My name is Michael Cawley. I'm a risk manager, born and bred risk manager. The first 35 years I was a risk manager, fell into the profession very fortunately. From day one, I fell in love with it. 10 years at a good-sized, diversified service company in Boston, Massachusetts. The next decade and a half with a biopharmaceutical manufacturer, with manufacturing and worldwide operations. And importantly, for the last decade, before I've worked with DoubleCheck, I work with as the ERM governance and disclosure person for ACE, which became Chubb halfway through my 10-year stint there. I was involved with DoubleCheck in the ERM governance and disclosure in the automated tool that you're going to see here. But we're going to approach this discussion of enterprise risk management in a more holistic 40,000-foot level. What we're going to try to show you is a pragmatic, actionable, simple look at the discipline of enterprise risk management. I mean, this year, RIMS celebrates 75 years in its history, but in reality, it's been 50 years since risk management really took hold, and an even more short time span, I would say, in the middle 2005, 2006, the verbiage enterprise risk management came to the forefront, and I think it's been a relatively slow proposition to understand the difference between enterprise risk management and risk management. I am one of you. For all the risk managers out here, and I see 48 people, I'm assuming a good number of you are risk managers. I am one of you. So I would welcome questions as we go along. I approach this from the risk manager's perspective, and this is a labor of love for me. So I would like to ask Tim to go through the slides. Go to slide 1. I think it's important to set out in your own words what enterprise risk management means. And in my opinion, the melding together of 3 different elements is what makes enterprise risk management what it is. And those 3 elements are the strategic, foundational, and tactical elements. Enterprise risk management means nothing unless it's wedded to what the organization is trying to achieve with regard to that discipline of risk management. So we say here, the strategic purpose is to create, preserve, and realize value for the enterprise. It's certainly, this definition of enterprise risk management can be molded to your liking, but I think the important piece that we'll keep reiterating is the fact that the strategy of why you're doing it, the why, the how, the foundational elements, and the what, the tactical execution, are the three elements that I think make up enterprise risk management. We're going to keep harping on that, and we're going to show you some ways of demonstrating that to your senior management. If you're a broker or an underwriter, or you're in a tangential element of risk, it'll still be purposeful, I think, for you to hear what someone has developed as their way of thinking about enterprise risk management to make it work for an organization. Next slide, Tim. This is a word cloud, and I put it up here only because my 10 years with ACE, which then became Chubb, was a very important one for me to understand what enterprise risk management really meant for the organization. And again, you see in the vertical axis, strategy, foundation, and tactics, you see the iterative use of words: identify, assess, mitigate, and monitor. Those would be the four pieces of the tactical execution. And you see some other words here that over and over again are used, or should be used, because when you think about it, enterprise risk management involves the coaxing, the cajoling, the convincing of people internally and externally that you know what you're talking about, that you're doing what you say you're going to do, that you're managing risk appropriately. So this is certainly not intended to be flashy. I think we want to get across the message, and we want to keep iterating the message to all the constituent parts of the organization, because an important thing that we're going to say is that you can't do this by yourself. There's no risk manager in the world that can do it by him or herself. So what you need to do is to establish governance. When I was hired by ACE, which then became Chubb, I didn't know what the word governance meant when it related to ERM. I shouldn't really admit that. That's not something. I think the statute of limitations probably expired. But in reality, I didn't know what governance has meant, but I see it, I saw it in action. I saw what it meant. And really what it meant was that you are deputizing subject matter experts within the organization to help you achieve your risk management purpose, goals, and so on. Without that help, without that subject matter expertise, without those roles and responsibilities, the accountabilities, you cannot have the discipline working the way it needs to work. And oftentimes you hear about risk culture. Risk culture is not something you go out and buy at the corner store. It's something that is embedded in the organization in a purposeful, deliberate manner, disciplined manner, by assigning roles and responsibilities, getting input, and making it truly a discipline that is embedded in the everyday operations. Next slide. This is really the three elements of the framework. And I think when I was back being a risk manager in the first 25 years, I probably thought that somebody talking about a risk management framework was talking about busy work, something that was going to collect dust on the shelf, something that was not important. Many of you out there probably can feel my pain in knowing that you just don't have enough time in the day when you're a risk manager. In the years from 1950 to 1975, the first 25 years of what RIMS is calling its 75 years, risk managers were really insurance buyers. So how they solved problems, how the industry solved problems was going out and buying insurance. And as the market became unbearably hard in the 70s and 80s, risk management evolved. What the framework talks about is really taking it to a next step, establishing a framework, establishing a governance process that will work for the organization. So you see in the first rectangular box, the strategy, the context and the strategy. What does this business do? Each one of the businesses out there that risk managers on this call have is going to be slightly different. Just like the businesses that I have, the service company in my first job is quite different than the biopharmaceutical manufacturer. So you have to know what the business profile is. Where do your risks emanate from? What are your high-level business goals? So I know what it was for Chubb. From reputational to performance to capital preservation. But you have to understand that from a board perspective, senior management perspective, what are your high-level business goals? Because you're trying to merge together the purpose of risk management with your high-level business goals to help you achieve those goals. And so what is the purpose? What is the mission statement? So that strategy, this business of risk management of ERM, it's not some think tank, corner office, ivory tower element. It's really embedded in the business, and it's only as good as it allows the business to achieve its high-level goals. The foundation is something that probably is not talked about very much, but it's composed of a lot of different items that don't change from day to day, that aren't iterative, that are established as a means to have what it says, a foundation for your ERM program. So this is a program. And I think importantly, what's your overall cultural model? What kind of ethics do you have? What do you reward? What do you punish within the organization? And I think from a compliance perspective, from an ethical perspective, that's important because that's not divorced from the idea of risk culture. Risk culture would be, in my view, what is the shared understanding of what risks you're going to assume. So how do all the people within the organization understand what their shared responsibilities are? We're going to show you the 3 lines of defense. And many of you may know about the 3 lines of defense, may have some views on it. But in my perception, this is vital to help understand what is the foundation that allows you to act upon your mission statement. We're going to show that in detail. And then from a high level perspective, what are your material risks? So let's say an organization would have a dozen important risks. It's important to have risk policies and appetite statements and tolerances for those particular risks. Finally, the tactical execution, the day-to-day iterative job of managing risk. And probably for the first 25 years, I spent my time within this box, doing a lot of the individual projects that are associated with tactically executing upon the risk. So establishing the risk universe. What are your risks? And we'll go through a simple way to categorize your risks, and then to spell out what are the risks in that universe. And then importantly, what's the 4-step process that you will follow on all of those risks? And we're going to show you an automated tool that will simply and pragmatically allow you to identify, assess, mitigate, and monitor risks. It's not going to bedazzle you. It's not going to be overly complicated. It's going to be simple, because ultimately this has to be straightforward enough so that the risk owners within the organization are able to understand it. If you're applying rating scales to each one of the risks and you're asking the risk owner to understand that, he or she has to understand it very clearly and give you the feedback that will allow you to understand whether the metrics that they're providing make sense, whether they need to be challenged, critiqued. But it needs to be straightforward enough, not complicated, and we will show you what that looks like. So again, the 3 elements of this: strategy, foundation, and tactics. Next slide. A couple of definitions, and again, we're operating at a 40,000 foot level here. The definition of risks, I think, is good as any: the effective uncertainty on the achievement of objectives. The mission statement, and I certainly didn't have a mission statement during first portion of my risk management career, but I think it really bespeaks of the need to set the stage for the organization. And here again, we're going to meld strategy with tactics. The tactical part, the process to identify, assess, mitigate, and monitor all enterprise risks, all enterprise-wide. Not some of them, not the ones where the risk owners supply the surveys and not others, all enterprise-wide risks that might impair the company's ability to achieve its strategic objectives. So again, the last portion of that sentence is the strategic importance. The first part of the sentence is the tactical execution. Next slide. Okay, in these next two slides, we're going to show you what I used at Chubb to show what does the 3 lines of defense in actuality mean. You may have heard it in passing. Some people throw shade on the concept of 3 lines of defense. I would like to double down on the importance of understanding the 3 lines of defense, because people need to know within your organization, need to know where they fit in. What are their roles? And so this is what I would call the horizontal view. We've deliberately put the first line of defense, and the first line of defense would be at the business level, directly responsible for the management and control of risk, usually at the business unit level. Business and functional management. What does the second line do? The second line would oversee. They would facilitate. They would provide oversight and coordination. They could be any of the committees, any of the functional sections within the organization: legal and compliance, actuarial, corporate risk management. So they would oversee what the people on the ground, the boots on the ground, are in the first level. The green would be the second line. The third is deliberately, it's not lined up being first, second, and third, but in this diagram, first is in the middle, because the third line of defense, namely internal audit, external third parties, board committees, they would have independent assurance and challenge over both the first and second line. So you can see they challenge and validate both the first and second line. So this is one way to present it. This is a meaningful way to show all the people who might be brought into the equation to help understand risk management, and to not just understand it, but to participate in it. So the second line of defense is an active participation. If you have a risk committee, for instance, as the first green rectangle, that plays an important role. If first line needs to provide a quarterly report to the risk related committee, then that's a fundamental oversight proposition that risk committee is providing. Next slide provides a slightly different view, and this would be the vertical line. And we talk about, well, is this discipline that we call enterprise risk management, is it top down or is it bottom up? I would suggest that it's really both. It can be perceived in both manners. And so if we're looking at it from bottom up, we would show 4 categories, just for demonstration purposes. We would show the entire universe of risk is presented in these 4 categories, or examples of these 4 categories. And the categories we show are core business risks, which we would say are the ones that make you money, the revenue producers. What do you do? So for Chubb's purposes, insurance would be that first risk. The next 3 blocks would be very similar from organization to organization. Organizations would have financial risks, whether it's market, credit, capital management. They would have operational risks, which really are large in number in terms of the number of operational risks, and many of which have profound implications: information security or cybersecurity, information technology, human resources is in there, compliance, fraud. So those would be the kind of risks that are entertained in that category. Strategic risks would be represented, or represented examples would show up here: merger and acquisition, new products. So these are 4 categories, and they should be broadened out to include all of them within your universe. But it's our way of showing what they are. That's the risk universe. The second line in that very light gray middle section would be executive management, would be product and profit centers, management, and risk committees. So we're looking at it from bottom up. That second line would oversee the people who control the universe of risk, the risk owners. The third line would be shown in dark blue, navy blue: board of directors plus board committees, external audit, internal audit. So top down, bottom up, who is providing the enterprise risk management ideas and concepts? We could argue that it could go both ways. It's a bottom up and a top down proposition. But this representation, this diagram, I think shows it nicely, while also showing in color form what the legend shows: first, second, and third line. Next slide. To provide a little bit more detail, the worst thing that could happen here is that you miss risks. When we're looking at risk, when I was looking at risks in my service company, in the biopharmaceutical company, or as an insurer, you want to make it understandable. You want to make it in a format that is categorized appropriately. And so here again, core business category, insurance. The three prominent ones would be underwriting, reserving, and reinsurance. There are others. Financial category, again, here's some samples, operational as well, strategic as well. Two important points down the bottom. The risk universe is dynamic in nature. So if you establish a risk universe for your organization, that's not a one and done deal. It has to be evaluated each year. It's dynamic and can change from year to year. Risk can come off, risk can go back on. So just one example, if you looked at risk registers or risk universes probably 10 years ago, there was probably no such thing as cybersecurity or info security that we show here. It probably was all lumped into information technology, but certainly the advent of more cyber risk has argued for that being broken out, separated into its individual risk, and that's what you would find in most risk universes or risk registers. So the risk universe is dynamic. It can also encompass emerging risks. Climate is one example here. So, the question often comes up, well, where do you put emerging risks on your risk universe? Until they've emerged, you would just keep track of them. You wouldn't necessarily put them in the risk universe, but once they have emerged, you would put them in the risk universe. And the risk universe and this overall framework that we're talking about needs to align with other risk-related initiatives, whether it's ESG, environmental safety governance, environmental social governance, DEI, or any other acronym that's used to break out combinations of risks within the universe. Everything revolves around the risks that are portrayed in your risk universe. So it's vitally important that the risks are properly chronicled within your universe. Next slide, Jim. Tim. We're going to quickly go through the 4 stages of tactical execution, and I think that'll just segue into showing how those 4 elements of tactical execution show up in this pretty simple automated tool. Identify risks. Again, the subject matter expert, the risk owner, would describe the risks that could compromise the ability of the organization to achieve its business objectives. This iterative process provides the mechanism for risk owners to describe their risks. So we're going to ask some questions of the risk owners. It's going to be straightforward. There's going to be buckets of information that we ask him or her. We're going to be asking a small number of metrics. We're not going to spend our time belaboring points, but we need to get at what risks within the organization need to be prioritized for further resource allocation. The only way we can do that is by asking them appropriate questions about severity and likelihood. So the first stage is to identify the risk. Next stage is to assess the risk. We're going to build out the metrics. And again, this might sound complicated, but we're going to make this simple. Likelihood, severity, both of them on a before and after controls basis, and direction and velocity. Those are going to be 6 metrics in total. We're going to rely on the risk owner's experience as well as his or her analytical and intuitive thinking. And then we're going to communicate all of this information in a very common business language, because importantly, this needs to be carried forward both internally and externally to be used as an actionable information. Next. The third element in this tactical execution is the mitigation, and to elicit from the risk owners what are the steps that are being taken to reduce the severity and likelihood from a inherent before controls to a residual after controls basis. So both from a severity and likelihood perspective, what are the controls? And each one of those subject matter experts has helped design or should understand the range of mitigation measures. And we're going to ask that that particular person also show that on a first, second, and third line basis. So these aren't all being mitigated at the first line of defense. There's work being done at the second and third line. So we have to delineate between lines of defense and mitigation processes that we're taking into consideration. Finally, the fourth step, and again, this is over and over. This is do it today, wake up tomorrow, you're doing it tomorrow. You might be mitigating, you might be showing mitigation on certain of your risk. You're monitoring. The monitoring would be the ways that you keep track of the risks, the key risk indicators that you've set up to understand where you may have exceeded tolerance. How are you going to keep track of it? How are you going to measure your risk management processes? This monitoring will be able to do that, and it's important from an actionability perspective to have that, to be able to escalate action when risk indicators have been exceeded, and trigger actionability. Next slide, Tim. Okay, this is a prototypical risk report that is presented from our system that is tells a story, and tells a story about the information that has been input by a risk owner. In this case, it's the risk owner for cybersecurity within the organization. And what we want to do, again, is to make this understandable. It has to be a two-way street. So if we're asking this risk owner to be the subject matter expert, to be our colleague, to be our deputized individual for this risk, we need to make this understandable, clear, and understandable. And so this particular risk report is designed in a Word format. The information will flow out of our automated tool. And what we're going to do here is to show you in 5 or 6 pages how we've jammed this full of important, straightforward, pragmatic information that will tell a story that can be used across the organization as a individual report that synopsizes how risk is viewed within the organization. First page. On the first page, we show the risk description. This is just our version of what this cybersecurity risk should be defined as. So ultimately, we're going to the risk owner and we're asking the risk owner whether he or she thinks the risk description needs to be modified at all. Does it tell you the story? Does it tell the organization the kind of risk that we have here that we're trying to manage appropriately? And I think this is important background information that sometimes overlooked. Causes and consequences. Setting the stage for the discussion of this risk is preeminent. So it's important for this particular risk owner to give us what he or she feels are the causes and consequences of risk. Otherwise, why are we in the business of setting this framework in motion? But this gives us a running start. It provides background information, and it's a time that we can give to think about what could happen and where did the risks go wrong. And these are just examples of, we could have 17 in here if the risk owner wanted to be verbose. But from a consequences perspective, we could get more voluminous as well. Next page. When we talked about risk controls, what are the risk controls that are practiced for this particular risk? And here we've listed 9 first line, 1 second line, 2 third line. I want to stress these are just examples of what are the controls. But I think importantly, again, it shows who's doing what. What are the roles and responsibilities? Who's accountable for these risks, for these risk controls? And this allows us to speak in more detail about what's mitigating both severity and likelihood. Key risk indicators, these are 7 examples of what key risk indicators could be established. And these can be buffed up a bit. They can be put on your own words. And importantly, they can be establishing the tolerances beyond which you don't want to go from a tolerance perspective, beyond which the point is reached where action is escalated. It will then be reported to a committee, and actionable steps will be taken. Next slide. We talked about metrics. Here's the severity metrics. And I think a couple of points here. This looks like a lot of information. So let me just try to break it down. We're trying to show inherent before controls and, importantly, residual after controls, residual severity. Why do you have so many columns? Why you have a 1 to 5 rating scale? Why do you bother with so many columns? That allows the risk owner, in our perception, to focus on what is driving this risk. What is the particular identifier that drives severity for this risk? It could be a financial perspective. You can see the financial impact. So the financial impact will allow you to better understand the magnitude of the risk. But it could be more dictated or more sensitive to brand or reputational severity. So in that case, the risk owner, he or she might focus on that next column, the brand reputation, and on and on. If it has particular from a compliance perspective, regulatory interventions might be the thing to float your boat. So in that case, that column would be what the risk owner is particularly focusing on to formulate his or her metrics. And the metrics there are 1 to 5 rating scale. The big point I would make is that this is the maximum impact severity that's expected over the next 12 to 24 months. All of this can be molded to your own liking. Where the rubber meets the road is really that blue row, where with controls in place, this is expected to have moderate severity, a 3 rating, for one of the reasons that they're talking about here, either financial, reputational, regulatory, or strategic. So that's where it comes out. Next slide. Melded together with that is the likelihood. Okay, so you've got the severity, you understand how that was formulated. The likelihood is a 1 to 5 rating scale, a little bit simpler explanation, but importantly, the twist is we're not interested in the likelihood of all events. We don't want to take into consideration, we want to eliminate the fender benders, the risk losses that are severity of 1 and 2 from the prior page listing. Anything it has to be a significant risk event. It has to be 3 and up. So what's the chance of a significant risk event before and after controls, before being in the reddish, after being in light blue? In this case, it's possible, and that adjectival phrase is not enough. So from possible, well, what does possible mean? This means that significant rent event, again, 3 and up from the prior page, might occur under specific conditions once every 10 years. So this has been an evolution for us where, yeah, it was just an adjectival phrase before, but it's important to have a temporal measure. So you can see, does it go from almost certain, which is once every year, all the way down to rare, once every 50 years? It's very important for you to establish, in our estimation, some sort of temporal measure that would allow you to define likelihood. So the likelihood in this case would be possible. Working together with the severity, you have a possible event. Tim, could you flip back to the prior slide? You have a possible event, and it's a moderate severity. So those 2 elements would be severity and likelihood. Let's go beyond. The final 2 metrics that are more secondary, but still important, and you could view them as sort of tiebreakers. If you needed an extra look at a particular twist on a risk, the 2 that we think are important to include would be direction and velocity. Direction would be, is the likelihood of a significant residual event increasing, stable, or decreasing? 1 to 3 rating scale. And again, on a 1 to 3 rating scale, if it were to happen, would it happen quickly, rapidly, or would it slowly emerge? 3, 2, or 1? Again, these are secondary measures that would supplement what severity and likelihood looks like. But I think they are important. And again, if you have 1 hour with the risk owner, it certainly would be something to ask him or her about direction and velocity in addition to severity and likelihood. So the combination of all those is 6 metrics. Next slide. Where this ends up would be the demonstration here is what we call a risk arrow heat map. 5x5 rating scales, severity on the vertical axis, likelihood on the horizontal axis. What does the multiplicative combination of severity and likelihood look like? The slides will be available after the presentation. We're gonna send you a PDF as soon as the presentation is over, and it's a great question. So in this case, if we just look at cybersecurity, it starts at 25, which is before controls, which is 5 almost certain and 5 very high for severity, likelihood and severity. But again, that's before controls. The length of the vector, which would show the impact or reliance on controls, and in this case, cybersecurity would be reduced to a 12 rating, which would be 4 high and 3 possible. So the multiplicative impact of that would be 12. And that then would be juxtaposed against other, in this case, we assume that this risk owner owns 3 risks, and you can see that fraud, for whatever reason, shows up as very low. But in this risk owner's perception, cybersecurity is rated at 12, which then needs to be compared to the rest of the risks in your risk universe, with all of these risks sort of put to the test of being analyzed with exactly the same rating scales and the same methodologies. Next slide. I'm going to turn this over to Tim Eide for a few slides. Tim?
Yeah, we found it useful to kind of show what some of the users of such a system would actually see, to kind of emphasize all those tactical things that are going on. So the owner of the risk, the top level director of risk, or whoever is in charge of the ERM project at the company, obviously would have a series of dashboards giving them sort of an overall view. So something like this might be an example. So I can see a distribution of who the risk owners are. I can see a distribution of the residual risk results, how many high, how many moderate. When the risk assessment is ongoing, you want to kind of see an overall chart of how the assessment is progressing, but possibly more importantly, a kind of high level view. You can see the numbers across the top of the right there. How many risks have changed substantially during this assessment? So where did risk owners make changes that you might need to know about? How many are prioritized by someone for whatever reason the board is particularly interested, and any other flags that might take place? This risk is DEI related, so if you have a DEI initiative, you might want to know about that. As the risk manager, again, so the person in charge of the project, you would want to have a top level view of the risks. And here you see a view of the risk register. The categories are all collapsed. Mike talked a lot about an insurance company. In this case, we're looking at one where the core business category is construction. So that's just a different top level. And then you can see, at this level, you can do filtering. You can see how the assessment is progressing. More interestingly, if I open one of the categories, so here I opened the financial category, for example. So from here, as this manager, I can see and adjust who the risk owners are. I can see where the various risks are in their assessment process. And then you can see the credit risk has actually had a material change. So maybe I would want to go and examine that a little closer. If I open a risk, like I open credit here, I can now see all of the kind of information that we were seeing in that report. So at the top level, I see the owner and then the inherent residual results and the control impact. When I open it like this, I now see a listing of the causes, consequences, KRIs, and the various controls. And note that I have actions from here. I can review them one at a time. I can add new ones if I want to, and so forth. So that's all as the risk manager. Now, if I'm one of the risk owners, I see a similar view, but it's simplified, right? I only see the risks that I have been assigned. So in this case, my user is responsible for cybersecurity, fraud, and information technology. In this case, you can see I've completed my information technology assessment, but I haven't done the cybersecurity ones yet. So they have a big orange button telling me that I have work to do. And obviously, like, I can't change who the risk owners are here, that sort of thing that the manager could do. If I select to see details on fraud, similarly to before, we see the various items. And again, I can add new ones. For my risk, I can do quite a bit of things here. If I click on the button to complete my fraud risk assessment, I now see the details for this particular risk, some of which we already saw. So the description, so this feeds into that column of the report. I can select what I believe, I can update what do I think the inherent residual values are and so on. If I click on any of those question marks, I will see the same kind of information that was in that report, so that we know the risk owner is looking at the same information that the people viewing that report will see. Now, in addition, for fraud, just as an example, there are probably things going on in the company related to fraud that I need to know about. Many companies perform a distinct fraud risk assessment, for example. So in this case, I can click on, you can see there on the right, I have access to simply a report. Well, so what were the results of the last fraud risk assessment that the company performed? So I could click on that and I could see how all the various fraud risks were coming out. If I have some kind of compliance framework in place, that may also have issues in it that have been created that are flagged as impacting fraud. So I could see a list of those here. So I would make my updates and click the complete button, and then I'm done. This is the kind of display, again, of those various values, and you can see it's simplified a little bit, but it's basically the same information that's included in that detailed report. Finally, I might also be expected to be able to present some information about my particular risks in some kind of, in a meeting maybe, or something like that. So you can produce a scorecard which gives you the arrow heat map just for this risk. It gives you a display of the other various values like direction, velocity, also an indication of control result. And then on the right side of the screen is kind of interesting, is a display of this risk over time. So I can see how has this risk been progressing over the past few years, and it's no surprise to anyone that cybersecurity tends to be increasing as we go along.
Thanks, Tim. As we went through this process and we developed this ERM1 tool, which is really an out-of-the-box enterprise risk management tool designed to align with a framework on ERM. Two things came to mind that sort of fueled our purpose in doing this. The first is the belief that organizations did not have an automated ERM platform, and instead were relying on spreadsheets, whether it's Excel, PowerPoints, and so on. That was me back in my days of risk management. So I know what I am speaking about. I'm not saying that it is not an issue. It certainly is an issue. So the if you believe that ERM is an imperative, is really imperative and not a choice, then you at least have to consider thinking about the kind of tool that would support the level of enterprise risk management process and framework that you would establish. The second type of organization that we saw in sort of propelling us to go into this would be organizations that may have a tool, may have an infrastructure, may have something they call risk management, but in reality, it's something that is a tag along on other systems or maybe designed for someone else, whether it's compliance or internal audit or something else. And attendant with that would be confusing systems. The world is full of acronyms, and so GRC systems are not immune from that. And they often start with an end in mind that isn't designed to be in the best interest of the risk manager. So what we designed and what I think is important is something that fits with the overall purpose of the ERM framework. So the career, the discipline is enterprise risk management. This ERM1 platform, we certainly feel like might be worth your consideration. With that, Kerry, we'd love to turn it over to questions. And I'm not sure how much time we have, but
you are right on the hour, actually. I know that Ian was quite keen to make some comment. I'm not quite sure whether he's been able to access his mic as yet. Ian, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Kerry, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
So, look, sorry, apologies for earlier of the technical difficulties. Look, I think just both straight away, I guess, to Michael and Tim, thank you for that presentation in relation to enterprise risk management. Obviously, sort of reinforcing some message for more experienced risk managers we have amongst our members, and probably just and educating some of the newer members to the risk management side. We do have a lot of questions, but unfortunately we sort of have run out of time. And Rodney, I can see that you've got a whole lot there in Q&A, and I think Rodney was sort of talking about, funnily enough, how this stuff is really quite fast moving and has already changed in maturity and things like that, especially when you're looking at it from that strategic perspective and how you've been able to look at those ratings and things. So the world of risk management is certainly moving dynamically and fast. So on behalf of RIMS New Zealand and Pacific Island, I'd like to thank you both, Michael and Tim, for that engaging presentation. Just with other members on the line, just remembering that we will continue with our lunch and learn sessions. We take these opportunities. We've got Ross Liston. I think Ross will be still on the line, but was earlier. Ross will be presenting next week on pretty much a real sort of extension or a fit into this, which is silo to synergy, embedding risk management in strategic planning. So if you're looking at that strategic planning piece, that foundational piece, this will be some great insights for you through Ross next week. We have some other things. We've got a refreshed website coming soon, the membership structure, and keep an eyes and ears out. We're hoping to celebrate an event here to support the RIMS 75th anniversary. But thank you all for your attendance here today, and hope you enjoy the rest of your wet and wild Friday.
Ian, could I just, if someone, and we did this with Ontario last week, if someone were to have questions, we would certainly welcome, if you wanted to shoot me the questions, I would shoot you back my proposed answers. We don't want to leave people sort of unfulfilled if they had certain questions, and it would just be one person's opinion about the answer. So we would love to do that. If you wanted to shoot them to me, I'll give them to you, and we'll also give you a the PDF of the presentation as well.
Thank you very much, Michael. Much appreciated.
Great. All right, thank you very much for the opportunity.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks as well.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.